Sorry. You have to excuse me if I'm not the clearest. They said the technology was pretty good, but not perfect. I don't really know myself. I'm still getting used to talking like this. Give me a signal to stop if you can't make out what I'm saying. I'll start from the top. I've never liked concerts much. Don't get me wrong, I love music, but I like music from the comfort of my quiet bedroom, earphones in my ears, blanket up to my chest, and leaning back on my well-fluffed pillows. Concerts are far too loud, and the sound system was never good enough to carry the detail and precision I craved. I appreciated the odd bit of improvising musicians do live, but most times I can hardly hear it, and I've never been able to get a good view of a stage, except through those giant screens they put up when even the organizers admit no one can see anything otherwise. Looking at those screens and straining to hear anything but noise and the bad singing of the crowd just made me want to go back and find a good live recording. Those were fun. Of course, nowadays, music is less of a pleasure for me. I still love it, but enjoying it is a bit more complicated. On top of all that, I was always somewhat terrified of losing my hearing at concerts. They were so loud, I could hear the distortion on my eardrums, and the ringing and inability to hear my friends afterwards always left me afraid, until they fully passed, hours later. Days after each concert, I find myself obsessively looking up studies on hearing loss after exposure to loud noises, in order to reassure myself. Ironic to say this now, but it feels relevant. These are all good reasons to avoid concerts, of course. But my friends always drag me back, and I always let them, hoping it'll be better this time. After all, I like the bands we went to see. We loved the same artists and had formed a band long ago. I'd been a brief part of it before quitting after the first live gig. For all my love of the exquisite polyrhythms and the harmonics of math rock, the playful power of jazz hop, and the pure unadulterated energy that is hyperpop, I really couldn't stand the noise. I can't stress that enough. That particular concert had been held in a small club, relatively central, one of those places which shows some might call intimate. I had excused myself for a bit after a particularly trying piece that involved a call and response with the crowd and a particularly enthusiastic and tone-deaf man behind me. As you can tell, I'm not exactly the tallest, so I had the unenjoyable experience of someone scream shouting over my head. Outside had been empty except for one other girl, dressed in heavy black clothing that covered her top to toe. I remember thinking that in the semi-dark, orange-wash night, the only indication I had at first of her being a person and not a particularly dark and poorly lit part of the wall was the fact that her gloved left hand was visible, fidgeting and tapping the wall erratically. The other indication I had of her being alive and mobile was stranger. Once every few seconds, I glimpsed what looked like bright, gleaming points as she opened and closed her mouth, as if tasting the air. At the time, I passed it off as another one of the new fads that was always passing around. Probably fake. They gleamed too bright and looked too sharp to be real. Knowing what I now know, I wish I had taken that initial sense of weirdness as my cue to run. Instead, feeling a need to break the awkwardness and explain my presence in a way I am no longer entirely sure was my own choice, I started to walk right up to her to greet her. I'm not usually a very outgoing person, but I'm polite and friendly enough, I like to think. So it wasn't entirely out of character for me. It's increasingly hard nowadays to figure out what is me and what is... Never mind. It gets difficult to think about this stuff. can't remember everything clearly. What I do remember is a growing sense of unease as I got closer to her. It wasn't even that she looked strange, wearing that heavy black hoodie dress, tights and boots. Close up, those were normal enough, if a bit darker under the street lamps than they should have been. It was the static that began to fill my ears, slowly but surely as I approached, that made me feel deeply unsettled. I told you about how I can't stand loud noise. By the time I was a few steps away from her, that static was all I could hear. It got worse every time she opened her mouth. When she did, a blast of distorted noise would hit me, and I would feel darkness tugging at the edges of my vision, threatening to swallow me. Before the almost tangible but directionless, no, omnidirectional noise faded briefly into echoes. All the while I continued walking. At a certain point, it became clear to me that I no longer knew why I was walking. I think I may have cried. I think I may have crawled. I don't know. I remember the overwhelming noise. I remember the feeling of my brain filling with it until every other thing was pushed out. I remember pain, ragged, all-encompassing and nerve-fraying. I remember it knifing through the inside of my body until it felt like my bones were made of broken glass. I don't remember much else. Until I woke up, feeling something sticky and warm on my head, with my friends around me. My memories are foggy from there. I remember glimpses of the hospital. I remember being discharged and something about a cluster headache. I remember sharp teeth and pain. I don't want to say the word, but I think you know what I'm thinking of. After all, bats echolocate, don't they? What would it be like for one to be the size of a person? What if they use their voices just a bit differently? I remember reading that a whale letting out a click next to you could kill you. A woman at the hospital told me to come to you. She wrote your address down for me, told me you'd want to hear from me. I don't quite know why I came. It felt like I needed to. Maybe this matters to you. Maybe you actually believe me. I guess that's all. If you excuse me, I have a dinner appointment.